Hi there. So what we're going to talk about in this video is how you can bypass the row limit in a tab in an Excel workbook. So the row limit in a tab in an Excel workbook is 1,048,576 rows. What a geek. But that's not actually ideal, particularly with the prevalence of big data coming around. Finance teams often want to use Excel for combining and analysing more data than we can put in an Excel workbook. So why is that a problem? Well, let's say that we were analysing some sales data year on year, and we've got more cells, more rows of data, so over the 1 million rows, over the 1.1 million rows of data in our data set. How would you analyse that? You can't put it in a single table, or at least you can't use a pivot table because you can't put all of it in a single table. And as we know, pivot tables need to be connected to a single table, unless of course you've got a cube. What you could do is splice the information into two. So you could put some of the data in one tab, then you can put some of the data in another tab, and then you'd end up having two different pivot tables. But that is a long way from ideal. Now, that also rules out pivot charts. It also rules out static charts. Now, what you could do is you could use some static tables. So you could create a summary tab, and then you could put some of the data on one tab, some of the data on another tab, and do some formula calculations on your summary tab. But oh my goodness, how long would that take? Firstly to write, but also to refresh. So if any of you have ever just sat there at period end just waiting for a file to open because it's got a ton of data in it, and then calculations on top of that, I feel your pain because I've absolutely been there. Now what PowerQuery can do is it can take lots of files, either they've got small amounts of data or got large amounts of data, and then put it together in a single query. Now PowerQuery was built to deal with literally millions of rows, which means that not only can it combine data sets with lots of different amounts of rows in them, but also it's fast at doing it. So in the Excel file that I've got open at the moment, over here on the right hand side, we can see the queries and connections screen, and we can see that I've got 2.7 million rows of data available within this workbook that I can now do something with. So let's see how the PowerQuery can do this. So first of all, I'm just going to go to a folder which has got the files stored. Now here's all the files stored in a folder, and each of these files, when they're all cleaned up, have about 350,000 rows together, which altogether come to about 2.8 million rows of data. So how can PowerQuery manipulate this into a single query? Well, let's go into PowerQuery and have a look. Now there's a number of different ways that you can get all the information from all the files into a single query in PowerQuery. Now firstly, you can do all of the cleaning of all the files separately and then append them together, so that's one option. That's a little slow. You can also save all your files to a folder, then connect to a folder on your OneDrive, your hard drive, or your shared drive. You can connect to a SharePoint folder. You can connect to an Outlook folder. Now that last one is actually really useful, particularly if you can schedule reports. That's a brilliant one. People seem to overlook that one. Now once you've got all the information from all the files into a single query, then what do you do then? You still can't load them all into a single Excel tab. So what you can do instead of loading them into a table into a tab, what you can do is load them straight into a pivot table or a pivot chart or into PowerPivot, or you can just not load them all together if you wanted to. So let's just close and load. So now I'm back in my Excel file, and I've just loaded up a pivot table that we can use. Now as we can see on the right hand side of the screen, I'm actually using PowerPivot, and the way that you can tell that is because there are 4 different tables available for me to use. Now PowerPivot's pretty cool in its own right, but we'll talk about that another time. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to start loading in some data. So I'll go to the sales data table, and then I'll bring in the store. So as we can see, our store information's come in, and then I'll bring in the sales units. Now, as you can see, even though we've got 2.7 million rows of data, how quick was that with a pivot table? It was lightning fast. So we can then put in months from, we'll put that in from the calendar table. So there we go, it's as simple as that. Even though we've got 2.7 million rows of data in this workbook, we're still able to use all of them, and it's just as fast as if we'd had hardly any rows at all.